Hello and welcome to another edition of Shattered Lives, the Irish Daily Star and Irish Mirror's crime podcast. I'm the paper's crime correspondent, Paul Healy, and today on this special edition of our pod, I'm talking with our crime and defence editor, Michael O'Toole, about the Ashling Murphy trial. So just to briefly tell people of the facts, Miss Murphy, a 23-year-old school teacher, she was killed while out jogging in the Tullamore area, County Offaly last year. And 33-year-old Jozef Puska is on trial accused of her murder. So we intend to cover the entirety of this massive trial, which is set to last for 5 weeks, but we are bound by the rules of the court. So we can't give our opinion in this case until matters are concluded, but we can give you the facts. So without further ado, I'm joined by Michael O'Toole. How are you, Mick?
Hello, Paul. Greetings from Phoenix Park.
In your car again, are you?
Yes, doing this a lot recently.
Yeah, we should nearly turn this into a podcast from our cars. It's a kind of a thing that seems to be working for us. But look, this, we're being cautious and careful, and I hope our listeners can understand why. And perhaps maybe we should just, before we get into things, Mick, I propose to just talk about in general maybe how the court process works, because people might be curious about, they might recall from our previous podcasts on the special criminal court, we had a lot of freedom as to what we could say, and that is because it was a non-jury matter. So in general, when covering a criminal trial, we can only report the facts of what is heard in a criminal trial in court, and it's that is because everything that is before a jury, the jury has to decide the facts of the case, and we are bound by that process.
Well, I mean, that's essentially it. Now, this is purely speaking generally. The rule is we can report, and again, generally, we report in a jury trial what the jury hears. In the special criminal court, we have much more leeway because there's no jury. There's only 3 judges, and they're very learned judges. And for example, Mr. Justice Tony Hunt, who is the presiding judge in the special criminal court, and by coincidence is the judge in this trial, has basically said that judges cannot be prejudiced. So when there's a special criminal court, when it's 3 judges, we have a lot of leeway, and legal argument happens. Obviously, it has to happen in front of the judges because they decided. So it's almost indistinguishable from the evidence or the direct evidence itself. But again, speaking purely generally, there are matters in jury cases that the juries do not hear, and we can't report on them until afterwards. Yeah. So we're now going to talk about this case, and it hasn't started yet. Today has largely been a procedural day, but it might be interesting for people to see what the procedures are.
Yeah. Now, I'll just ask you about that. Obviously, you were at the court building there all day today, and it was a lengthy process today, but there's very little that actually can be reported on the end of the day. That's because the majority of the day was taken up in a process of empanelling the jury. Is that right?
Yes, but now this is the interesting bit. We can't talk about this because the people who were empanelled are the jury, so there's no problem. So essentially, what happened was there were 3 cases. Mr. Justice Tony Hunt is the judge in this case, but he was presiding over 3 issues that required a jury, 3 separate cases, and it was one sort of panel of prospective jurors who were sort of called to hear all 3 cases. So there were 3 cases. I won't mention what the other 2 were, but Mr. Puska's case was the last case to be called. So the jury was essentially what happens. First thing that has to happen really is that the person has to be arraigned or formally charged. So at 1353, Jozef Puska was formally arraigned in the Court 13 of the Central Criminal Court, CCJ complex, the Criminal Courts of Justice complex there down beside Phoenix Park. And he was, as I say, he was formally arraigned. And what that means is he is formally charged. The charge is formally put to him. So at 1353, the court register put to him that he murdered Ashling Murphy at Cappencur and the Grand Canal in Cappencur in Tullamore in County Offaly on the 12th of January 2022. I think just shortly before that, the registrar said, "Are you Jozef Puska?" And Mr. Puska said yes. Then the registrar, as I said, arraigned Mr. Puska and put it to him that he murdered Miss Murphy in Cappencur on the 12th of January 2022. Now, through an interpreter, he said not guilty. So that has effectively started it. So once that happened, the process of empaneling the juror began. Now, Mr. Justice Hunt at this stage did warn prospective jurors. He said there has been a lot of commentary online and everywhere else about this case. So he said two things really, really important. He said anybody who feels that they have been affected or have seen so much commentary that they cannot be impartial really shouldn't be taking part in this. But also he said anybody who has commented online or on social media really should not be taking part as a juror in this case. So after the process began, and I think after about 40 minutes, the jury was selected. So there are 3 women and 9 men, and they will hear the evidence. So Mr. Justice Hunt welcomed them, and he thanked them for taking part. He says it's a very important constitutional task they were doing. And he asked them to retire and to elect a 4-man or 4-person who will do a lot of things. He said they will sit nearest me. There's a seat, obviously, there's 12 jury seats, and there's one there closest to the judge. They usually, not always, chair deliberations for the jury. And what they also do is they sign the issue paper when there's a verdict on behalf of the jury. But he again stressed, and he said, look, please disregard what has been said. He said this is really garnered more than its fair share of commentary, and he said please disregard that. And he was very, very strong about that throughout the whole process. He kept on talking about, if you feel as if you've seen too much or it will affect your impartiality, please come forward and issue a final appeal. And then at the end, he basically said, ignore media, ignore social media, ignore mainstream media. He said, you people are the ones who have the best seats in the house because they're in the room. He said, ignore everything else. Your job is to look at the evidence, nothing else. Nothing else matters. And so it was a very, very strong message from the judge today.
Very strong. I would just say in general, because in relation to that point made by the judge in court today about ignoring media, people might think in general that they can give opinion on cases. And look, we're not here to tell people what to do. We're certainly not going to give our opinion on a trial. That doesn't stop people from on social media doing that. And ultimately, judges will say a jury should not be looking at the internet. That is not a green light for people to just go ahead and give their opinion nonetheless. So I would just warn people, is all I'd say. Just be careful about airing your opinion on any criminal trial in general. Can I ask you, Mick, and again, we are limited, but just, I suppose giving a little bit of an insight into what it was like in the courtroom. I imagine there was a large presence of media.
Yes, I'd say there was about just over a dozen of us. So all the major outlets were there. So yes, can I just read just what the judge said? It's just from my copy. So he reminded him to ignore news reports. There's some good quotes here. He said, your job is to decide the case on the evidence. Divorce yourself from anything that is said outside this room. He said, you do not need to know anything about the reporting of the case. You have the best seats. There is no need to pay attention to social media or mainstream media. So look, you're right, Paul. We're certainly going to be very careful. Just an example, I very rarely do this, but I was doing some live tweets about the case today, and I've just made it that only I can reply. So nobody would be able to. So I don't know what you call it, locked, but I've made it that only I can do this. So look, there are the caveats. We can't stop people doing what they do. The judge did say for people to ignore social media and mainstream media as well. Decide the case on its merits, and he's very, very strong in that. This is about the evidence that they will hear and in this room and nothing else.
Yeah, in spite of that, as we say, it's not a green light. You can still be held in contempt of court in any court issue. So we would just warn people to be careful. Also, just Mr. Puska himself, did you take note of what he was wearing in court?
Yes, he was wearing what I would, my terrible sense, he was wearing a grey jacket, grey suit, and I think a cream sort of stripy shirt. So yeah, so he was there.
And were family members of Miss Murphy there?
I don't know. I'll be honest about that. I don't know. I was too busy taking notes that I really didn't have time to look behind me. But just they may be there tomorrow. So essentially, today was a procedural day. The case starts in earnest tomorrow. Now we will leave tomorrow to tomorrow, but the judge did tell the jurors that this court case will last 4 weeks, but he said, erring on the safe side, it may go into 5 weeks, but he said he will give a very significant exemption for the jurors after this case, because essentially you can be called to be a juror again. So he's going to give a significant exemption for those jurors, as I say, 3 women and 9 men when this case comes to an end. 4 weeks, 5 weeks, however long it takes.
Yeah, no, look, we haven't heard many facts in relation to this case yet, but I understand the prosecuting barrister is Anne-Marie Lawler.
Yes.
And the defense barrister there is Michael Bowman. And I see that Miss Lawler she outlined that there'll be obviously multiple witnesses in this case, and that many of them will be from Tullamore, and there'll be many Garda witnesses, particularly from the Midlands and Dublin stations. And then there was just very brief information given about Mr. Puska, as in where he is from,
yes,
and that he has connections there in the Muckla area of Tullamore and
yes,
in Crumlin.
Yes. So essentially, you're quite right. Miss Lawler said that there will be lots of civilian and Garda evidence from the Tullamore and the Midlands. There will also be Garda witnesses from Dublin, and there will also be witnesses from FSI, Forensic Services Sciences Ireland. Mr. Bowman said that at the time Mr. Puska was living in Muckla, which is just outside Tullamore, that he was not in employment at the time. He also said that Mr. Puska at the time had close family in Crumlin in South Dublin. Now, he raised the point about St. James's Hospital, and Mr. Justice Hunt expanded on that, and he said that Mr. Puska was in St. James's Hospital in South Dublin in January 2022, and that any prospective juror who knew about that really should come forward and open up and say they knew about that. So there were some facts stated, but the trial is due to start in earnest tomorrow, and as I said, it could last up to 5 weeks. And Mr. Puska denies the murder.